My earliest memories come back from the early 1950s. We had moved from Kansas City, Kansas, over to Palmdale, California in 1957. And in the early 60s, 1961 or so, I would look out, and every morning we would hear sonic booms in the sky, and you go up and you look up and you see this little white cloud going across the sky. And years later, I found out that little white cloud was a contrail being made by the latest technology that was being created by the United States government out of Edwards Air Force Base. And unbeknownst to me, it was individuals like General Chuck Yeager later, or at that time it was Colonel Chuck Yeager, and other astronaut trainees like Ed DeWitt Jr. And you would hear these sonic booms, and I'd look up and I'd be fascinated watching these contrails going across the sky. And I remember back in 1961 hearing about a launch, and we had these black and white televisions, and so I was actually able to witness Alan Shepard being launched in space in 1961, and I was only about 5 years old at the time, 5, 6 years of age, and remember watching him being launched in space straight up on a parabolic arc and then back down. And then later that year, the second launch was with Gus Grissom. And Alan Shepard became the first American astronaut to fly in space, along with Gus Grissom as the second, and then in 1962, John Glenn. So at that time, my father would take us to air shows around the area, Palmdale Airport, Palmdale International Airport, which was a big aerospace facility, Mojave, and out to Edwards Air Force Base and places like that. And so that got me really interested in wanting to be an astronaut. So I would look in the sky, and I see these airplanes, and at these air shows, I watch the guys skydiving out of airplanes and stuff like that. And it just fascinated me to wanting to become a pilot. I never really thought about it as being impossible to do. So as I grew up, I always I had heard about being an astronaut, and so when my brothers and sisters at the time, they would tease me. They'd ask me, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I say, "I want to be an astronaut." And they say, "You're not going to be an astronaut. You're going to be an astronaut." So they would tease me about that. And so over the years, even when we moved from Palmdale over to Pomona, California in 1963, and my fascination and interest continued at that point in time. And I remember some of the other Mercury missions that went up, and I remember asking my mother one year, like I think it was when I was in middle school, when the Gemini program got started, and they were going to send up 2 astronauts for the first time and launch them up around in space. And I would ask my mother, I said, "Mom, would you wake me up early in the morning if I do all my homework early? And so I'll go to bed early, and if you wake me up so I can watch the launches that was taking place." And I didn't know where they was taking place at, but I knew they were going to be launching early in the morning, and many of those were being launched out of Florida at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And so she would wake me up early in the morning, and I'd sit there and stare at the TV and watch these guys being launched up in space. So that was always a fascination for me at that time. There was not a lot of role models out there at the time. But I just kind of blended in, and the school accepted me. I never had any issues or anything like that, racial issues or anything like that while I was going to school. One of the instructors that I became good friends with was a gentleman by the name of General J. Brown. And General Brown, he was also at one point in time the director of the United Airlines Flight Training Center. And so after he retired from there, and he came over and he worked as an instructor. So he saw me as a young man African American that had come from California to Colorado on his own to study aviation. So he kind of took me under his wing, and I have this photo, that one right there, that I had taken a family photo with my mother and father and my 9 other siblings in 1976. So when I got there, you know, he liked me so much, and I gave him a copy of my family photo, and he put that on his wall in his house. He lived over in Lakewood at the time, and I actually had a chance, you know, to go by and visit with him and his wife. And he showed me, yeah, I got your picture on the wall. So I said, wow, that's pretty amazing. And so he just kind of adopted me and took me under his wing. So one day I went in and sat down and chatted with him, and I said, Mr. Brown, I have a question that I need to ask you. And he said, what's that? And I said, how do you feel about all those people that you have all their lives in your hands? Don't that ever make you nervous? And he looked at me and says, no. And I said, well, why not? He says, because he says, if I take care of me first, they will be taken care of. If everything is okay with me, I know everything in the back is okay as well. And I took that to heart, and I lived off of that philosophy. Hey, you take care of me first, and then everybody else will be taken care of, the flight attendants, the passengers, and everything else. So I've kind of lived it, and that's how I've taken the approach to flying airplanes and carrying people around the world. So my career basically ended up working as a flight attendant for about 8.5 years, and then transitioning into the cockpit finally after being turned down a couple of times as a pilot. It took me 3 interviews to get hired. And when I started out as a pilot, I started out as a flight engineer on Boeing 727s. And I did that for about 5 years, moved from the engineer to the right seat of the 727. Then the training center brought me in, and I worked as a pilot instructor at the training center. And then United asked me if I would be a recruiter for United, so I became a recruiter. So I did that from 1987 all the way until 1992. And then I left the training center and I moved over to the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 based in Los Angeles, where we flew 10 11-day trips out into the Pacific. And I did that for 3 years, and then transitioned from there over to the Boeing 747-400. I flew the 400 as a first officer for 19 years. All of the pilots, because of the nature of where we flew, was international, all international pretty much. And we had most of the time 4 pilots who were all rated as captains on the airplane. So from 1995 all the way up to 2014, I flew the 400. And then from 2014, they decided to close down Los Angeles on the 747. And I ended up transitioning from there over to the Boeing 777 as a captain on the 777, where I flew that out of Washington, D.C. for about 5 years. And then ultimately, in 2019, I transitioned from the 777 over to the 787 Dreamliner. And so that was about 34 years of flying as a pilot, and 8.5 years as a flight attendant. So altogether, a little more than 42 years as an employee at United. Well, to me, it was an enormous sense of pride, you know, to be a black pilot, knowing that when I hired on as a flight attendant and then flying for 8.5 years, and then when I hired on as a pilot, I was the 34th African American pilot in the history of United Airlines. I'm on a trip to Washington, D.C. I'm flying the 747 at this time. And I go over and I'm laying over at the Hilton Hotel, the very same one that President Reagan had got shot at. So I walk in the room, it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I turn on the television, and most of the places that we fly around the world are foreign language. The only language they had in those countries were English on television. So CNN News was the main channel. So I got used to watching CNN News. So I walk in the room in the Hilton Hotel about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I turn on the television, and they had this program that was an hour-long program on crime and prisons in America. And at that time, in the late 90s, they were building a prison every week. And they said they had in excess of 3 million people in prison, on probation, or parole. And no sooner than they laid the last brick, that prison was already saturated. And I said, wow, that's unbelievable. So I just kind of stuck it in the back of my mind. And about a month or so later, I'm flying the trip we call the W, flying from LA to Tokyo, Tokyo, Honolulu, back to Tokyo, back to LA. So I arrive into Honolulu about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, getting ready to jump in the shower. And I had the news on in the background, and I hear out the corner of my ear, Congress increases the number of foreign national visas to 58,000 visas. And I said, 58,000 visas? Wow, what was that all about? So I waited 30 minutes to hear this rerun, only to find out that under House Regulation H-1B, we did not have enough qualified people in the country to fill these positions. So they had to go abroad to bring in people from around the world to fill the vacation of these jobs that are in our most strategic industry. And I flashed back all of a sudden to the scene in Washington, D.C., where we're locking away all of our kids in prison. And I knew at the time 65% of those kids in prison were African American. But yet we were only 12% of the total population in the country. And so there's disparity there. And I said, and then at that point in time, the light bulb popped on in my mind. And I said, wow, here we are locking away our kids. What we need to do is make them part of the solution versus being part of the problem. And so I flew back to Tokyo, back to LA, and I hopped on a plane, came here to Denver. And right away I picked up the phone and I called up our VP, Mr. Roger Gibson. He was a Western VP for United Airlines. His office was downtown Denver. And I said, hey, Roger, I would like to come in and sit down and talk with you about creating an organization that can help the kids in the school. So Roger and I sat down and talked. And so we pulled in some business leaders, some educators, fellow pilots and engineers, all into Roger's office, and we started brainstorming. And so we say, okay, well, what do we call this organization? And well, we're brainstorming, writing names on the board, and one of the guys, he was a former Air Force Academy grad by the name of Donnell Smith. And while Donnell was at the Air Force Academy, he did a video, a documentary showing going all the way back to Bessie Coleman, the Tuskegee Airmen, the guys that followed after them, and then we are all standing on all of their shoulders. And so he called the name of this video was called Shades of Blue. And Donnell said, well, why don't we call it Shades of Blue? And when he blurted that out, I instantly flashed back when I was in the 6th grade. We took a field trip over to the Griffith Park Observatory in Los Angeles. And looking at the dome, you see all the constellations as they moved across the heavens. And then right before daylight arrived, you can see it getting brighter and brighter at the lower end of the dome. And then here comes the shades of blue. And then in my travels on the 747, we would fly like from LA to Sydney, and we're leaving Sydney coming back. We leave out about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we fly into nighttime. And then as we get out about 130, 140 degrees west of longitude, and all of a sudden you look out over the horizon because you're out over the middle of the Pacific Ocean, not anything is out there, and you start to see the different colors of blue as the sun's coming up above the horizon approaching the terminator. And I said, wow, that's one of my favorite times of the day. And when he said, let's call it Shade of Blue, that instantly flashed in my mind, and I said, that's it, we'll call it Shades of Blue. And that's where the name of Shades of Blue came from, you know, from us wanting to help kids, because we felt that we could help all the different demographics. You cannot get to space unless you go through the shades of blue. And we encompass all of these different areas of interest, whether it be aviation or space or aerospace or whatever those areas, we encompasses all of that. My best hope is is the industry right now. We're short, and these are Boeing numbers, we're going to be short about 804,000 pilots by 2030. And we're going to need about 914,000 flight attendants, 769,000 aircraft mechanics. That's just 3 categories within the airline industry, and there's a whole host of other ones. So we're looking at just those 3 alone, 2.48 million people short by 2030 worldwide. And so my goal is to help these young people be able to create generational wealth. And what better way to do it if you get the discipline, you get the knowledge, the skill set to become an airline pilot. It's a lot of hard work to get there to that level. But once they get there, I have a niece that started out with Delta, earning 6 figures as an Airbus 320 first officer her first year. And these kids, if they're able to get their skill sets to the level where they get an airline transport certificate issued by the Federal Aviation Administration, they can hire on with a major airline at 23 years of age, earning 6 figures plus for 40 plus years. And if those kids are in a position to earn that type of capital, they can take those funds, and the way I see it as an overall picture, all of these kids have an opportunity. Everybody under their umbrella, their immediate family, they benefit from it. Their community, they benefit from it. Their cities and their states, they all benefit from it. So everybody in their sphere of influence can benefit from these people that are able to make 6 figures plus for 40 plus years. Now they take those dollars and they can leverage those dollars, invest those dollars and everything, and now they can spread it out amongst themselves. The beauty thing about Shades of Blue is the fact that a lot of these kids, because I've helped them out, they're turning around and they're giving it out, and they're reaching out and they're paying it forward. So that's the beauty of everything that we're doing, is we're creating productive members of our society, of our country, and of the world, that these kids are in that position to help out.